for the question and answer session. I've actually got a number of questions here, so apologies in advance to anybody who might get a bit further down the list or whatever. Here was one that came in. Some of these things that I think you've covered, Tom, in your talk, so you can be brief and just refer back to what you've already said if you wish. But we'll have one here. Since we are being denied the right to attend a funeral, can Dr. Brown offer any advice on how to deal with mourning alone?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Although things have got better, they're by no means back to normal. I suppose I have covered some of this, though not specifically in relation to mourning. The second thing, the first thing is try not to mourn alone. There must be other people who've lost a loved one. So, or there likely will be, there may not be. So talk to them. Expose yourself to things to a degree, expose yourself to things that will bring back memories of the loved one, because grieving is absolutely essential. So, avoiding reminders is a very bad thing to do. So, look at pictures, look at stuff they've written, so you have to some degree, just like you would do normally, to allow yourself to go through the grieving process, because expressing appropriate emotion following a bereavement is the essential first step to grieving, and reinvesting in other relationships is usually follows that, and that of course is exceptionally difficult just now, because the only way you've got to reinvest in other relationships is through things like Zoom and over the phone, and where we're not even allowed to go into each other's houses just now. So there are definitely some challenges, but try not to postpone it till this is over, because we don't know when this is going to be over. So allow yourself to express emotion and do what you need to facilitate that, like looking at pictures and reminders, and if you can, talking to others who knew the individual, or who's sharing your grief, and if need be, look for some professional help, because it's still available. The counselling agency that I run has got a bereavement wing to it, and we've been operating throughout this because we're very, very conscious that people have had some quite bizarre grieving experiences. All the things that I as a doctor would have told people to do, like, except in exceptional circumstances, see the body after death, go to the funeral, don't avoid doing that, talk to people, some of these things have been well nigh impossible, not the talking to people, but talking to people in the same way is. So there are going to be real difficulties. So I would say your threshold for seeking help in this one should probably be a bit lower than it would be under normal circumstances.
If I can add an unofficial comment about a friend of ours who, his mother died, and they'd had care workers that were looking after her, and rather than let them be browbeaten by the restrictions, they found a way to try and get around it, which was, instead of going to the funeral itself, they went up to the gates at the thing just to see the funeral cortege going in and give them a wave. That was their way of saying goodbye.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Douglas. That's very helpful, and that's absolutely right. And the other thing that some churches have been doing successfully is streaming funeral. I've attended 2 funerals by Zoom, and it's certainly better than nothing. So.
Okay. This is one which is about the media. I think you've covered quite a bit about the media, but do you think that the media, there is too much and it's having the effect of increasing fear for some?
Well, yeah, I've already said yes to that. I think the other problem with the media is that, let's leave social media to one side just now. One other problem with the media is that we've all got our own views, politically, socially, and we all tend to seek confirmation bias, okay? So we read the newspapers that are in accord with our political views, which will which confirm what we want to be true, whether or not it is true. It might be, it might not be. So one of the other, and if I read, let's take two papers at opposite ends of the political spectrum. If I were to read the Guardian and the Telegraph, I'd have completely different views in this. Completely different views in this. So, and we tend to read the ones that are closest to our own views, which is yet another problem with the media. But, I'm glad we've got a free press in this country, and I'm glad that we've got access to that range of the media, and they can provide useful information. They're necessary for holding all governments of all hues to account. So I'm not decrying them, but I would definitely ration your exposure to it and be aware of your tendency, which I've got as much as you, of seeking information that confirms your view of the world and the way things ought to be.
This one's really about your prognosis for the mental health services, because before COVID, there were extremely high demands on the service. So what, after this 6 months and counting of this abnormal life that we've been leading, what do you feel the prognosis is for the health service to be able to cope?
I think it's going to be really challenging. I wouldn't try and put any gloss on that. As you correctly say, Douglas, it was stretched at before this. I told you, I think during my talk, that 10 years ago and for 5 years, I did a job for the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and I was the Royal College of Psychiatrists recruitment lead, and the reason in the UK, and the reason the Royal College of Psychiatrists needed a recruitment lead is that psychiatry is a shortfall specialty. It's not a particularly popular specialty. So things were getting better before this, but they were by no means as good as they could be. So they will be facing real challenges, both because of an increase in demand, but because the supply has always been a bit short of what it needs to be. So I think it's going to be very challenging. There's another factor that I'll come back to that will add to that challenge. I think it'll be very challenging, and I think they'll prioritise and they'll focus on groups that they perceive to be particularly vulnerable, and some folk may be cast adrift. Now, the snag about folk who are cast adrift is that historically, although I spent my life working in the NHS, I've spent my retirement running a charity that provides counselling services. Now, last week in the British Medical Journal, and it's also made the mainstream media, there was a big article on how charities have been devastated by this. And the NHS is very dependent on being propped up by charities, mental health charities and other charities. For example, two of the charities that have really been devastated are Marie Curie and Macmillan, who are involved in cancer care. Because they make most of their money by big fundraising events, which have been a no-go during this. And the same will go for mental health charities. And a fair number of charities have gone under. And certainly for the first 3 months of this, we came perilously close to running out of cash. Fortunately, that's not happened. So there's a double whammy. Firstly, there'll be an increased demand on a service that was already stretched, as you said. So they will prioritise, and some people are not going to like the way they prioritise. And secondly, the normal bailouts in the third sector might not be there. So, for example, when I was working, my service being in the general hospitals, had a big triage function. And there were people who I knew, even then, we're talking 10 years ago, that the mainstream NHS psychiatric service probably wouldn't take. I had a few very good services in Glasgow and the west of Scotland that I could send less severely ill people to, if you like, but who still needed help. I fear for what might be happening to some of these services just now, as well as the NHS. So I think big challenges are faced. I should say most services have tried pretty gamefully to continue to function during this. And there have been lots of Zoom consultations. They're not quite the same, but they're certainly better than nothing. So the services have tried to keep afloat, but it's been an uphill struggle.
If there was one thing that you could change about the way that the UK has been dealing with COVID, what would it be? Or is it simply up to us to find ways of coping with the ways that are dictated to us by the government and authorities?
Yeah, I don't know, Douglas. That's a very good question. It's a very hard one. And I don't think there's any one thing. I think the thing that's probably upset me most is how this has divided people. And I've deliberately stopped. For example, I don't engage with people on Facebook about COVID-19. It's a really bad place to try and have a sensible and measured discussion. And I've been quite distressed about how this has divided people, including people who got on quite well before this, because they're at different bits on that spectrum that I mentioned with regard to health anxiety and being blasé. I think that's the thing that's distressed me most. And that's the thing I would like to see change, is that people respect other people's views, not just in theory, but also by their behaviour. So in both directions, that they're a bit more tolerant.
Okay. So let's see now. I could run two questions here together, actually, that's all along the same lines. And that's about the level of trust in government, how it affects compliance rates by us as citizens, and also the subsidiary thing is, does the elite failing to comply, no prizes for guessing who's at the back of this particular question, does that elite failing to comply lead to the rest of the population not complying?
Yeah, I mean, let me answer the second question first. I think the answer to that is yes. One rule for them and one rule for us. I think the answer to that is yes. Sorry, Douglas, repeat the first bit again.
The first bit was just, does the level of trust in government affect compliance rates?
Let me kill two birds with one stone here, Douglas, because we had a wee practice yesterday. So Douglas and I had a wee discussion about yesterday. That it's absolutely crucial, the role of government in this. And part of the problem that we have here, both with information from the government, and the second bird stone that I'm going to kill is people's attitude to vaccination, partly which comes from the government. Part of the problem there is that those who are at the paranoid wing or even the conspiracy theory wing have got a point. Okay, so if I was to ask people in the room, do governments ever lie to us? The answer would be an overwhelming yes. They sometimes do, and they certainly sometimes withhold information for us. Maybe sometimes for good reasons, maybe sometimes not for good reasons, for their own political ends. Secondly, the vax denying stuff, they've got a bit of a point. Although as I've nailed my colours to the mast on that, I think vaccination is one of the most important public health things in general. But they've got a bit of a point, because the pressure that people producing vaccines are under just now to produce one quickly may lead to them producing a bad one, or even one with dangerous side effects. And when you get folk like Donald Trump saying, and here I am going to be political, the other day, that the American vaccine people were deliberately slowing down the production of a vaccine to affect his re-election chances, that hardly helps. And that's related to the trust in politicians issue as well. So I think it's a huge issue. And we obviously trust some politicians more than others, and that again may depend on who we vote for, or hopefully it'll depend on the character of the politician. But it is a very, very big deal in this, I think politicians ought to sometimes treat us with more respect, and not as if we're stupid, and be a bit more frank with us about things, and not withhold as much information as they sometimes do, or put a gloss on it, you know, like world-class test and trace. There's me being political again. Absolute nonsense. You know, it's junior league test and trace.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Do you have any thoughts on quarantine? I'm a bit concerned about this. Is it the 14 days enough returning from abroad? Does that really, because if that is true, then my mind leads on to why aren't we concentrating on just the number of infections in the last 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, to make sure that it's passed out most people's systems, and then the problem doesn't look as big as it did if you just do a cumulative number of total infections that have ever occurred.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of questions about quarantine. It's likely that the 14-day period is correct, because there doesn't seem to be too much disagreement about that. There's loads of disagreement about how it's been applied, and inconsistencies in how it's been applied. You know, and that's absolutely right. And I think that is that's an issue that needs to be explained better and discussed more. You know, I think sometimes the explanations for the rationale behind these things have been sadly lacking. And sometimes I think that's because there's no rationale for them. They just think they've got to do something. I think there's a much more big debate to be had on how long we're going to be prepared to put up with this level of quarantining. And at the minute, it's not terribly evidence-based, because as I said earlier, there's very good evidence that countries who've taken diametrically opposite approaches both appear to be doing reasonably well. But you know, I think there needs to be some better attempt to engage the public and how long they're likely to put up with this. And some of the measures that have happened are just frankly nonsense. For example, shutting the clubs at 10 o'clock as opposed to midnight is not going to make a blind bit of difference. And as we've heard argued over the last week, might make things worse, because you've got a flood of folk going on to public transport in big cities at 10 o'clock at night. So
I wondered about the student situation when they're talking about, you know, keeping them incarcerated in halls of residence until Christmas. That doesn't really tie in with 2 weeks self-isolation, does it, really?
No, absolutely. Exactly. And I think the thing that angers a lot of folks about the student situation is it was not exactly unforeseeable.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's actually, there is one that's come in, a late one here, but I think it's, as it sort of addresses a personal issue kind of thing and how to cope with things, I think I should mention it. It's could definitely do with some thoughts and advice on getting to sleep at night, because sometimes awake for hours, etc. Is there any specific thing that you could help with? Bearing in mind the sort of age profile of our membership.
Absolutely. In short, there's a good website called Sleepio. You can visit it. It's Sleepio as it sounds. Secondly, try and make the bedroom a place for sleeping, not a place for playing with your mobile phone, you know, or watching films on your laptop or your Kindle or whatever. Try and make it a place for sleeping. Try and have some routine around going to bed at a reasonable time, which will differ for all of us. Some of us early bedders, some of us are late bedders. Try and have some routine. Try and avoid stimulant drinks late at night, and these include tea and coffee, and certainly include too much alcohol. You know, 1 drink or 2 drinks might not do you any harm, but probably have them a bit earlier rather than just before you go to bed, not least because they also make you want to get up and pee during the night. So in fact, some folk would say if that's a problem, don't drink anything after about 8 o'clock at night, and try and do something that's not too stimulating before you go to bed, so you're on the wind down rather than that you're aroused.
Okay. Right, well, thanks very much, Tom. That's excellent. I hope that covers most of the things that people sent me on the chat, and if not, I think quite a lot of it was covered by your excellent talk. So I'll pass back to Kathy for some further comment.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was really a fascinating presentation. And thanks for being so frank with us as well. There's really much to reflect on. And I certainly liked the practical advice that you were giving us about how to structure our day and to find things to be grateful for. And if we can, practice mindfulness. As part of our U3A, we do have a meditation group. And during the difficult period in all of this, actually we had meditation on every day, which personally, I'm a member of the meditation group, and I found it so helpful. So these things were all really helpful. Thanks as well for these websites that you've suggested. And I think we would want to put that on our website, helpful websites for people to access. But just a tremendous input today. I think there's lots for us to think about. And thanks for comprehensively answering all our questions. I think our members will really benefit from this talk. And we are hoping that we will be able to put your talk on the website, and that others who have not been able to access the meeting today can listen to what you have had to say. It's just a super input all round. So can I ask the membership then, if would you like to go to your toolbars if you've got the computer and do our usual thing where we do a round of applause? We're good at doing that in this in this group. So if you would do that.